Thank you, Aaron. Our next presenter is Sonya Gray. Sonya, many of you may know her. She spent 3 years as an interpreter at the Hunashuka and is the daughter of the current leader of the Wushkitan clan. We've been talking about Wushkitan quite a bit, so here's the daughter of Wushkitan. Sonya, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. As was said, my name is Sonya Gray. Thank you. You should think I'm taller than I am. You may also call me by my Tlingit name, which is Shu Wu. I am an anthropologist and a curator of Indigenous histories and contemporary cultures north, which is all of Canada, at the Canadian Museum of History in Ottawa. I am from Huna, and a few of you may remember that I worked here at the park for the first three years at Hunashuka. And Greg once told me, Sonya, you are home. I just want to be here. So I guess you can say that I've always been here. I've never left. And every spot holds deeper connections. Greg found me during my time at the park, and we shared many lunches where he would recall his close relationship to the Tlingit elders George and Jesse Dalton of Huna. I always thought it was interesting as Greg aged, because with his walking staff and his wool jackets and his contemplative and slowing cadence of his speech, he started to look and sound more like George to me. We continued our correspondence over email, and he would send me poems and ponderances, of course. Was always charged with instruction and inspiration and trust. He sent me one McKibben quote that stands out to me still to this day, which reads, "There is something very powerful about the oldest and newest wisdom traditions converging on some of the same notions." And here we are. This is not meant to be a slight to anyone, but I would be remiss to not comment on the lightning format and an urgency to get to the science. I had to chuckle, as many of you may know, that trying to get a Tlingit to talk quickly and get to the point is inspirational, but it's not going to happen. And for good reason. But crisis does that to us, doesn't it? And it's probably a great indication, I would say, between the divide, what is the divide between science and Indigenous knowledge that Greg spent his lifetime contemplating, and was the subject of one of his last essays. Science is well known for its linear path and a ticking clock, whereas Tlingit time is not linear, but rests on relationality, kinship, and a slow expansion across generations. As Hank said, one generation is not enough. Well, Indigenous knowledge is multiple lifetimes. I would venture to say that my response, my relationship with Greg, as probably with all of you, is the places we met, the walks we took, the quiet observations, the deep conversations, the questions, the memories, the stories spread all over the place. That is the science. The take care of the place that George Dalton, when he called to Greg to his bedside in his last days, is what that means. Last year, Greg reached out to me via email. "Hey lady, you still out there?" I was. And we were going to meet. I was coming to Alaska to visit, and I was going to come to Gustavus as well. However, I couldn't make it because I myself became ill, and of course he said, "Take care of yourself first." And I wasn't able to have that last meeting with him that he wanted me to have. When I did return a little bit time later, of course, he had passed on. It was devastating. And Wayne had sent me his last essay. I couldn't open it for a very long time. I was devastated again that I couldn't make it. But I came over on a day boat visit to Hunashuka, and before I left, Melissa Sinak, who was there with him at his bedside vigil, pulled me aside before I got onto the catamaran to go back to Huna, and she said, "Greg wanted me to tell you something." He said, "You tell that Tlingit girl Sonya, take care of the place. And that's how it is, and why we are all here. Okay, back to time. I probably don't have to repeat to this audience that the land is rising beneath us at unprecedented rates, even though it is imperceptibly slow. Many of you will perhaps also recognize that glacial isostatic adjustment models predict that rebound in this area will continue for another 700 to 800 years as a result of ice already lost. I want you all to keep that in mind as you think through crisis, response and responsibility, and our relation to time, as I hope to make more clear what Greg knew when he penned. The good news, I believe, is that this apparent divide between science and Indigenous knowledge is only clear at the extremes. He said there's a lot going on in the middle. Most of us already live in the middle. It is the present. And again, time is a funny thing. Another important Tlingit elder, the Reverend Walter Sobloff, once said, "Take care of the ancestor you will one day become." Shuka, as in Huna Shukahit, means ancestor, but according to Downhauer and Downhauer, it is more than that. The concept is two-directional and literally means ahead. It refers to that which has gone before us in time, predecessors, those born ahead of us, who are now behind us. It also refers to that which lies ahead, in the future. Understanding Shuka helps reveal that there is no true divide between Indigenous knowledge and science. Neither of them are objects or separate containers. And so that means there is no bridge required. Rather, there are different ways of attending to time and relationality. And what better vessel to deliver that message than through story? This Huna story I'm going to repeat is a Huna story. It's called The War with the Bears. The Huna Tlingit who moved into Brown Bear Bay, or Port Frederick, after the surging glacier had displaced them from here, which was once a lush valley, they weren't the first inhabitants in Port Frederick. The salmon streams also came with lots of brown bears, and they fought. There were many losses on both sides, till finally it was decided that a house, a home, would be built and maintained in their honor, Hoots Hit. That relationship made possible by Gawakan, or the peacemaker, the Sitka black-tailed deer. Coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, George Dalton Sr. was also known as the peacemaker. It is also, in this story, after Hoots Hit was built, it is said that a deer was left at each doorstep of each house, a gift from the brown bear. It meant there would be no starvation, not war, there would be peace. The deer is also an indicator of ecological health and the balance between predator and plants, coast to mountain, and is also a complementary staple, not only in diet, but an offset to rising food costs and a keystone in political negotiations of resource management. That story was a pact, if you will, about access, an implied acknowledgement of responsibility and understanding that was not only recognized as between the bears and people, but that balanced peace between forest, river, sea, bears, deer, salmon, people is an inclusive, slow endeavor. The bears were honored. That brought about this relationship. And of course, we call the Alaska coastal brown bear grandfather. How could he be our grandfather? Well, he knows things we don't. He had established his own kinship with the salmon people in the rivers and has practiced that knowledge long before we did. He came ahead of us. He is our ancestor. And I might add that it is no secret that Huna eventually became a place of well-known fishers. This wasn't just a myth, it was a political order, an observation, a memorandum of understanding. It was also adaptive resource management, a theory of survival through relation. We, the Huna Tlingit, often think of and refer to Glacier Bay as our ancestral homeland, which of course it is. It also gets a lot of attention for its dynamic landscape. However, Huna is also the ancestor to Glacier Bay, in particular Port Frederick, Port Frederick is also carved by even older ancestral glaciers, where land and undersea terrains are rising, exposing reefs, changing aquatic ecosystems. The Hoona Tlingit were there also, and we have stories about pulling the reefs up, right? We were there for those 2 years of winter you might have heard about, and we were also in relationship with hunger, with changing climate, geography, social structures, and knowledge, all inextricable to one another and always moving. In those 2 extremely hard years of winter, it is also said that we observed the bears in the flats, digging clams and cockles. This would seem to acknowledge that observation as instrument, and we all acknowledge it's definitely the crux of scientific data collecting. However, why would we trust what we saw? How would we trust ourselves to know? How would we trust those bears? The story, of course, is that we were in relation, in kinship with the bear. Being in relation is the key. In Tlingit science, this kind of relationality is not separate from data, it is the data. It is how we know what we know. When we talk about gulls or tides or glaciers, we are not only referring to biological processes, we are referring to our ongoing relationship with those processes, how they feed us, warn us, leave us, come back to us, and change us. The ancestor is not gone, ancestor is ongoing. As an expectation of future that is capable of transforming the present, Glacier Bay, according to my ancestors, George and Greg alike, is right where they imagined me to be, where the slow and steady work demanded me to be. Not in crisis, not colonized, not displaced, not a victim of uncontrollable circumstance, but settled in, creating new territories, new kinships, through an ongoing conversation with both past and future agents, and of course, all of you today. The one constant is that our land, ourselves, are constantly transforming, not just today, and what feels is sped up to a level of crisis in our lifetime, but for as long as time immemorial, for as long as we have been in relation to it. Perhaps to the chagrin of those who want to preserve the dynamic and special nature of Glacier Bay is an illusion, an encapsulation that forgets that we are already taking care of a future place from an event that happened long ago. It is also a sentiment that mirrors the experience of crisis, is that Glacier Bay threatens to become no different from what lies beyond its borders, like Hoona. People, perhaps we should adjust our mindset to take care of Glacier Bay for the ancestor it will become. Maybe we are already doing it through the Seagull Egg Harvesting Act. As Greg pointed out in his essay, this was the middle, where both science and indigenous knowledge blended and blurred. But I would add that to stop asking how to include indigenous knowledge and start asking how it must be changed by it. The Seagull Egg Harvest Act is not simply a cultural practice to be factored into the conservation. It is itself a form of science and governance. To frame it as an exception to scientific management misunderstands the knowledge systems at play. What's needed is not accommodation, but reorientation. Tlingit knowledge is not just about what we know, it's about how we know. It should be understood as science, as indigenous science, one that changes us to all think beyond categories. So when I say relation, we're not talking about metaphor. We're talking about an entire method of science based on proximity, responsibility, and recognition of knowing something because you are a part of it. In Glacier Bay, the brown bears are coming, the forests are developing, the salmon are colonizing, humans are already here, and more importantly, the Tlingit are coming. Are there wars? Yes. There will always be. Is it necessary for movement? Despite losses and desired gains? Sure. But we are always in constant negotiation. And I might add, Greg, you are here. Thank you.